Hi, my name is Stephanie, and today I want to talk to you about sensory diets. So I have mentioned these before in a few videos when we're talking about ways to regulate and help people who have sensory issues. However, I've never specifically talked about what they are and gone over them in a video, so here we are. So, what are sensory diets? An article on using sensory diets to improve quality of life in neuropalliative conditions explains it as the following. A sensory diet is a unique occupational program designed to provide appropriate, controlled sensory stimulation in order to support optimal functioning while preventing sensory overload, and is moderated as preferences change. It aims to affect an individual's functional abilities as well as being enjoyable, calming, or stimulating. These balanced stimuli could be combined or balanced individually across a range of senses and occupations in order to optimize the state of awareness of the individual. A sensory profile assessment forms the baseline for a sensory diet alongside clear goals for the sensory stimulation offered. So basically, a sensory diet is giving someone appropriate amounts of sensory input that they might crave or seek out or need to help support their sensory needs. In turn, this could help support their functional abilities or be directed at improving those functional abilities depending on the purpose of the intervention. So for example, if someone needs tactile input, you might let them play with putty, which might also improve hand function and grip. Now the sensory diet would be based off of the sensory profile that is acquired, which basically finds out what types of sensory input someone might crave or need more amounts of, what they enjoy and what they like, and things that are aversive to them, that they don't like, or that overstimulate them. This is why it is so important for a professional such as an occupational therapist to be over a sensory diet, because they can oversee it to make sure that the person isn't being overstimulated. And a DIY version of a sensory diet can be dangerous if someone doesn't know maybe when to modulate things or when to take a step back, because if you're doing the wrong thing, you can actually make sensory issues worse. The paper continues explaining that a sensory diet involves all the senses using the framework of vestibular stimulation, visual stimulation, olfactory stimulation, gustatory stimulation, tactile stimulation, auditory stimulation, and proprioceptive stimulation. Essentially, the sensory diet addresses all of your senses. When we think of things like weighted blankets or sensory toys or fidgets, what we're really thinking of and the enjoyment that we get out of them are actually different types of sensory input. You might like certain types of tactile input and dislike others, or enjoy deep pressure from weighted blankets or absolutely hate them. These are differences in your sensory profile. Now this concept has a lot to do with what we were talking about in sensory seeking and sensory avoiding. In the future, I would like to be able to go over the occupational therapist who actually wrote the original things to do with that and helped our understanding of those terms and what they mean and how they affect each person. Another paper describes a therapeutic intervention schedule for a non-speaking, high-needs autistic person, which includes a sensory diet. A sensory diet was also considered a body wake-up, which indicated much of the main focus for the particular autistic person that they were working with. Since they were non-speaking and had dyspraxia, they had trouble connecting their mind and body. The sensory diet for them focused on proprioceptive input that would help them feel more connected to their body. The autistic individual highlighted in this article, David, later was able to begin communicating via AAC and even began working on speaking out loud. He shared insight with his OT team for the paper, including the following. The OT helps my body move better. OT much improved my senses. They used to need more controlling me, but OT has made my body calm, and now OT helps me use my body how I want instead of it controlling. And in response specifically to his sensory diet, touch is now heightened. From brushing, I'm now feeling my body for how to each time move, and it feels good knowing where it is now instead of moving it to feel it. But now I know I can move because it's now usable. It's getting easier to move and think together. David here describes something that many non-speakers have described, those who communicate in alternative ways. The concept of feeling like their mind and their body are disconnected from each other. Occupational therapy works to help the body and the mind connect better, making the brain more aware of the body. And sensory diets are a way to help provide the right amount of inputs to support this. Something to make note of in this paper is the mention of brushing, which is a very specific type of intervention that is meant to give deep pressure feedback. However, there's not a lot of quality evidence for this particular method, and the original creator of the method had this down to like a very specific way of doing things in a very specific amount of time and on a very set schedule that had to be done like all the time. They also emphasized that only those who have had special training for this should perform it. David, in this case, seems to find it rather helpful, but please note that this should not be done by someone who is not specially trained, because it can make sensory problems worse. Now, the initial idea for the sensory diet, from what I'm gathering, was a bit more strict in scheduling, trying to provide the right inputs and whatever else on a very specific schedule to try to like really help regulate the body. It really was more of a diet in that there were certain things given at very specific time intervals and such. From what I understand now, though, when we're talking about sensory diets, it's a little bit like looser, and we're talking about trying to provide the right types of input when it's needed, and maybe beforehand to help someone focus, and maybe removing input that would be aversive or being overstimulated and stuff like that, rather than focusing on like, it should be this many hours, or every time at 2 o'clock and then 4 o'clock and then stuff like that. David mentions this kind of idea inadvertently when asked by his OT about what some things are that could help him with stimming, which he personally would prefer not to do very often. He responds that giving him a lot of movement breaks before sitting and concentrating for a long time would be helpful. According to David himself, if he's given a chance to have that sensory input before he has to focus, he will be able to focus better because his body is more regulated. And a well-regulated autistic person doesn't need to stim as much because stims are a form of self-regulation. Sensory diets are also considered to be a part of sensory integration therapy, which aims to help those who have issues with processing of sensory input to be able to better integrate that into their system. Now, some valid concerns and complaints are that there aren't a lot of studies specifically going over evidence of efficacy, specifically when we're talking about sensory integration therapy or specifically sensory diets in that way. Now, there's a lot of things that support the concepts, and it is seen a lot in the field, but yeah, we would like to see evidence-based practice here. We want to see that there are studies proving that this is actually effective. So to help with that, I wanted to show you 3 peer-reviewed articles published in 2020 and 2021 that are adding more to the evidence base for sensory diets and sensory integration therapy. Although these are small in their sample sizes, across them there is consistent support for the efficacy of sensory integration therapy and sensory diets. The first one worked with adults who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. They found that through sensory integration and sensory diets, adults with IDD can experience improved sensory modulation, leading to increased social and community participation through the reduction of maladaptive behaviors. Another study looked into using a sensory diet that consisted of an activity plan created to help students with their sensory processing skills throughout the school day. They found that sensory diets can be effective in improving children's sensory processing, psychosocial, and classroom engagement behaviors. Now, the third study also focused on sensory diets specifically for students in the classroom setting. They too concluded that sensory diets may have a role in managing sensory processing disorder and facilitating the participation of children with sensory processing disorder in classroom activities. Now, less directly about sensory diets, but in support of the general concept, another source points out that studies support the use of active participation in multisensory activities for at least 90 minutes per week to improve occupational performance and autism symptoms and behaviors. Then it goes and cites 4 studies to back up that claim. Thus, there is a growing base of evidence supporting sensory diets specifically, which is encouraging as an autistic person going into the field of occupational therapy. For me, it seems like common sense that if you meet my sensory needs, I am better regulated and I can handle the world and I can focus. For me, experientially, it seems so obvious. My mind is blown that this isn't something that people have actually done a lot of studies on, But as someone who experiences issues with sensory things, the major differences that providing the right type of sensory input and removing certain types of sensory input can do for me, and how preemptively doing that can affect what happens later in my day. Like, to me, it's just common sense. But obviously, we would like to see actual evidence for it, and I am happy to see that efforts are clearly being made to make sure that that is happening. Now, of course, the first step for having a sensory diet is to have the sensory profile, so someone knows how to actually craft that for you. So if you want to go ahead and do this for yourself, you would reach out to an occupational therapist or a place that offers occupational therapy and talk to them about wanting to get your sensory profile. And then you can work with them potentially in seeing if you can implement a sensory diet into your life and see if that would be helpful for you. I hope that this helped you understand more about what sensory diets are and how they don't have much of a relation to food, other than the fact that taste is also assessed, and why it can be helpful to autistic people. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you know much about sensory diets, sensory integration therapy, etc.? Are you surprised, like I am, that there isn't like a super big base of evidence supporting this concept? And have you ever had a sensory diet? Has it helped you? Do you have experience with the concept? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy autism related videos from me, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I try to upload every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, except for the last Thursday of the month, where most months I will go live with you all. Thank you to everyone who supports me here on YouTube as YouTube channel members, through Ko-fi, and as patrons on Patreon. And a special thank you to my Spinny Stimmy tier patrons, Jack Varney and Philip Noah. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!